Lesson 10. In this presentation, we will be introduced to masculine nouns of the first declension, nouns like krites, critic or judge, and neanias, young man. We'll also look at first and second declension adjectives, the full declension of those. And then with verbs, we will be looking at the present and imperfect indicative of aime, I am. In addition to feminine nouns, the first declension also features some important masculine ones. These variants of the first declension are formed much like the ones we have already seen. We've seen so far these two variants of the first declension, time, honor, and kora, land. And what is distinctive about the first is that the endings are based on the letter eta, because the stem here ends in a consonant sound. Really any sound except for iota, rho, or epsilon. Whereas a first declension noun that ends with iota, rho, or epsilon in the stem is going to have its endings based on alpha, in this case, long alpha. Now, the masculine nouns of the first declension that we're going to look at today are similar in that if we have a consonant sound apart from rho, we're going to see eta dominate the endings, whereas if we have an iota, rho, or epsilon, we're going to see alpha. Simple as that. There are exceptions to the normal rules of formation. There are some things we only see in the masculine in the first declension. Those would be the singular nominative ends in sigma, as we can see from krites and also neanias. There's that sigma there. And we also see the singular genitive ending in u, just as we see the singular genitive in the second declension ending in that way. We also get some unique forms for the vocative. We see short or long alpha in the vocative for these masculine nouns of the first declension. Let's take a look. So we're going to start with a noun like time, and we're going to drop everything but its endings, and then we're going to take a look at the noun we're dealing with, krites, ha, judge, and we're going to drop the eta and sigma to get our stem, krit, and we're going to add that into all of the places we need it. And then again, we have three slight changes to make. The first would be adding a sigma in the nominative singular. The second would be changing that genitive ending to the u, characteristic of the masculine noun of the second declension. And then finally, our vocative form is unique and it's an alpha. So this is the full declension of krites, ha, judge. Now let's look at the other variant of first declension nouns that we've seen, kora, land, and we're going to take everything, take all of its endings, and then let's take a look at the noun we're going to deal with, neanias, those are long alphas. It means young man, and to get our stem, we're going to drop the alpha sigma and be left with the neane, and plug that into each of the places. And again, we have just three changes to make. Singular nominative is going to add the sigma. Singular genitive is going to change to u, characteristic again of masculine nouns of the second declension. And then we are going to see the alpha in the vocative. And these are the forms of neanias, ha, young man. Just as there are several declensions in Greek, there are also several classes of adjectives. The first class, the only kind we've looked at so far, includes so-called 2-1-2 adjectives like sapas. This adjective is pretty typical of the ones we've seen so far, and the 2-1-2 indicates which declensions endings these adjectives take in which gender. Let me show you what that means. So, for masculine nouns, we see the endings resemble second declension endings, the os endings, the logos, the logu, things like that. For feminine, we see the endings resemble first declension endings, alpha or eta in the endings. And for neuter nouns, we see second declension endings once again with the on. That is, for instance, when the adjective agrees with the masculine noun, we don't see the adjective take first declension masculine nouns. We see it taking second declension masculine nouns. So we're going to take a look at the full declension of sapas, sape, sapan, wise. And this gives us our stem, of course, and we're going to plug it into all of the cases and numbers and genders. And then we're going to add, in the case of this 212 adjective, the masculine second declension endings, which are ones we're familiar with, basically what we'd see at the end of logos. For feminine, we're going to see first declension endings, and we see eta here because the last letter of the stem is not iota, rho, or epsilon. And in the neuter, we're going to see the second declension endings we might see at the end of a noun like dohram. We're familiar with these as well. So this is the full declension of an adjective like sapos, a 212 adjective like sapos. Caution. Because an adjective may be declined differently than the noun it agrees with, the two may have very different endings. So for instance, we just looked at masculine nouns like krites, first declension masculine nouns, ha krites, the judge. If we want to add an adjective here in the attributive position, it would be hasapos krites. These endings here are clearly different, sapos and krites. The thing to note, of course, is that they still agree with each other. All three of these endings here, the ha, the os, and the ace, are all nominative masculine singular. So we have to be careful as we learn new kinds of nouns and new kinds of adjectives that we are determining whether grammatically they agree with each other and not just whether their endings look the same. In this case, the difference is the result of the adjectives being of the second declension, a 212 adjective, and the nouns being of the first declension. That krites is a masculine noun, but it's of the first declension, so its endings are kind of funny looking. They look more like the endings of most feminine nouns that we see. This is an important verb, aime. We've seen three forms of it already. We've seen aime, I am, estin, he, she, or it is, and asin, they are. We're going to learn the other persons and numbers of this. They happen to be second person singular a, first person plural esmen, and second person's plural este. So this means I am, you are, he, she, or it is, etc. Now, these are enclitics, except for the second person singular, which means that they do funny things to the accents of the words that go before them. So something to watch out for. This is the present indicative, the I am, you are, he, she, or it is. Let's look at the imperfect forms of this verb. These are going to be all new to us, so we simply have to learn to recognize these. Some of these, however, are much more common than others. I would say that the third person is far more important than the others. So these mean I was, ein, or a. We don't see this very often. You were, he, she, or it was, etc. And again, these are the important ones. Ein, usually he, she, or it was, and ason, they were. These are the forms of the imperfect indicative for aime, I am. For the forms of the words we've looked at, you want to look at these pages. First declension nouns, first and second declension adjectives, and the present and imperfect indicative of aime. Thank you very much.